Gracious and holy God, as we begin what will be a full day, we welcome your spirit. We recognize your spirit present here with us as we gather in the business of the church and the work of the church that we are about this day. Bless this conversation and bless our time throughout the day with your love and your grace. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, welcome everyone. We are recording this session so that those who aren't able to join us might have a chance to watch it a little bit later. And it's good to be together. We often in this session, I'll introduce a couple folks who are here. Nelda Clark, wave at everyone, Nelda. Nelda is our district board chairperson. And we also have our district ministry chair, Norma Sexton, with us. And we have our moderator, Mary Kay, our moderator-elect, Al Clark, and a couple of board members as well in Richard Zapata and Jeremiah or Jay Irizarry. So it's good to have all of them with us as well. We wanted to start by wanting to make sure that if there's things you'd like to make sure you get a chance to hear about in this session, that we talk about those. So you could either unmute yourself and tell us what you'd like to hear about, and we'll kind of build a list to make sure we cover those things, or in the chat feature, you could put something in and we'll pick it up out of the chat as well. But we want to take a moment to make sure we're going to cover things you want to hear about as we come together today.
Don't everyone speak at once.
Oh, unmute yourself, Phil.
I was just trying to type it. I gave you a heads up earlier, Russ.
Okay.
Based on the financial presentation by the Brethren person a few days ago, I'm wondering what you and the others view as the next 5 to 10, 15 years of the district, both as far as number of churches, number of members, and the financial situation. And a sub part to that is whether you think if any regrettable future sales of property occur, if you think the district might need to hold it closer to the vest to help you have a further out time of being able to have people in place to work with the churches.
All right, I've got that on the list.
And also, I'll be interested in knowing what's happening with the church plants.
Very good. Any other quick questions that you want to put on? We certainly can take others as we come to them. So, well, why don't we start, if it's all right with you, let's start with the church plant updates, and then we can look to move into Phil's question, which kind of leads into a little bit. We also want to take a little time to at least share a little bit about the budget that is going to be before you as we get going today. So Nelda, is it all right if I jump in with church plants, or do you want to?
Of course.
Okay. So heading into 2020, we had 3 new church projects going. We have a group in Los Banos, California, Centro Agape and Acción. And we have a group in Las Vegas, Nevada, Iglesia Cristiana Elohim. Luz Roman is the pastor there. Rigo and Margie Baruman are the pastors at Los Banos. And we introduced at district conference last year the new work we are beginning in Waterford, California. Florecita Merlos is the pastora. and they have named themselves Nueva Visión La Hermosa, Iglesia Nueva Visión La Hermosa, the beautiful New Vision Church, and all. So those three were operating at the beginning of the year. As you can imagine, since March, church planting has been a challenging endeavor, with needing to restrict use of space. In Los Banos, you'll recall we have purchased a property as a district in a commercial area and are working at a remodeling plan for that, because they were putting 65 people on a Sunday morning in a space that comfortably might have held 35 to 40 for a gathering. So there was a need for more space. That building we purchased, they will have a mortgage on with the district over the next many years. We'll have some support for them in the first couple of years for that. But that's been a good, strong congregation. And they became a fellowship at district conference last year. So they're still a project, but they are a growing group and working to do that. So. Hang on one second. So just a quick update on that. They have not been able to meet in there. They ended up giving up the lease on the space they had been renting because they couldn't fit in. They have been holding services via Facebook Live on Thursday nights and Sundays since then. And the building work has been slow as well. An engineering firm took longer, but we expect we will have the final approved plans from Los Banos by the 1st of December. And hopefully by February, they will have a space that they could begin to use and meet in. And hopefully soon thereafter, might be able to return at fuller levels. The Las Vegas group has switched locations to they're subletting from another church in a better location, better space, and better time availability for them. They were shut down for about 3 months of just using Zoom to do their worship services. And all. They are still a group of between 15 and 25 people, and working to reach more folks and to grow that. They have been back in their building. Las Vegas is allowing worship in buildings at 25% capacity, and so they're in their building and often are live streaming their through Zoom to Facebook the services in the building, but it's a small group there in the building. And in Waterford, Florecita had begun to gather groups for prayer and Bible study. She had had a Christmas party last year that had about 6 families come and join, and was beginning to kind of develop that core when the pandemic hit. And so she has maintained contact with those folks through this time, but they have not been able to really begin to meet for worship, nor to have the kinds of prayer gatherings of larger groups that they were having at that point in time. So that's what's happening with those 3 groups. The other thing I would say, though, is Brethren Disaster Ministries, when the pandemic settled in here in the United States and they had to shut down projects to send people to, offered opportunities for people to, they offered opportunities for congregations to make applications to get grants for congregations to use to meet immediate human need in their communities caused by the pandemic. And all of our Spanish language congregations in the district received those Brethren Disaster Ministries grants, as well as 2 or 3 of our English speaking congregations that worship in English. But Los Banos, Las Vegas, and Waterford were able to distribute $5,000 in food assistance, rent assistance, those kinds of things to hurting people that they were in relationship with, and to build some relationship with new people during this time. So they're continuing to try and keep up those relationships. They often did food gift cards, and so it gave them a chance every week to connect with someone and provide them another gift card. So the last piece that I'd share about New Church, and I think we have kind of looked at it, and the executive board has talked and said, this is kind of a lost year as far as expecting growth in the work of church planting. And so, we're kind of extending our move towards independence timelines for all of these groups by at least a year because of the impact of the shutdown. I mean, ideally, our hope is, 3 to 5 years, a tail off of funding. We're going to have to add a year for these folks. We've continued support to do that. The other piece, which we'll introduce in business today, is the Pasadena congregation, through their connections at Fuller Seminary, has made contact with 3 Spanish-speaking students there. And Elizabeth is here. Probably about a year ago this time, Elizabeth called me and said, I want you to meet some people. And so Conexión Pasadena is just getting going. They had hoped to be going this spring, but the pandemic has slowed that. But they have a core team of 3 pastoral leaders who we have licensed to the ministry. One is a young woman from Chile, and the other 2 are a husband and wife team who are originally from Colombia. Elizabeth is working on their visa situations and all of that. But they've started a Zoom Bible study and connecting people in to that, and are beginning to produce messages that they will share through a website that they're creating with the district's assistance to begin to reach out. So it is a New Church expression, but it is a part of the ongoing Pasadena expression. Is that a fair way to say that, Elizabeth?
Yes, I think so. It could be that they will replace us eventually.
Yeah. And Jay, who's down on at least on my screen, he's at the bottom, who's one of our district board members, is actually working with Waterford right now to help them get a website up and going. The draft is there. We're now waiting on information to come in to complete that and to fill that in. So, and that will come from Florecita. So, any questions on the church projects? All right. Well, Nelda, we want to take just a little bit of time and talk about the business, the one action item of business, or the main action item of business today is the 2021 district budget, and along with that, the 2022 spending maximum. And if you may have printed those pages out, it's pages 56 to 59 are the details on the budget in the business book. We also sent that as a PDF of just those pages to folks, so you had easier access to those. We will be honest in saying budgeting for next year was a bit of a challenge because you often look at what did you do this year, and we've saved a lot of money this year because I haven't traveled very much, but we've also spent more money in some areas, like Mission Church, our mission congregations through the ministry partnership funds have been fully funded, and we've used all of the funds available there, plus helping some churches try innovation in the area of online streaming and some of those kinds of things. The other piece is we didn't budget to send $2,500 to congregations for support in the midst of a pandemic. But we did that, and it's been important. And I think $35,000 that we have allocated to congregations that requested those funds. And that about offsets what we've saved in travel on the year. So we are projecting a relatively flat budget, a few little modifications in a couple of areas. Question in the chat was that sent out? We did send a link, and on the district website, the whole booklet is there. But in yesterday's emails, or earlier this week, I think it was yesterday's emails, there was an attachment that had the budget pages, the one that came from Joe. So.
Yeah, and that included the detailed budget.
Yeah. So, I mean, changes for next year, there's a small salary increase for the staff, basically based off of the 0.5% change in the salary scale on mine. And we did a 1% adjustment for our other staff. And we expect health insurance premiums will go up. They always seem to do that. And we also reallocated some additional money into ministry training work. And our ministry. So when someone enters into the process of preparation for ministry, part of that is a psychological assessment. And we have been averaging 5 to 7 people a year entering into the licensing process and training process for ministry. Those assessments cost us about $1,500 to get that assessment done of candidates for ministry by the psychologists that we use to do that. We have one who does work in English, and we now have a reliable psychologist who practices in Spanish and can give us reports in English, but can do everything, is licensed to work in Spanish. And so we've increased the allocations there, and it's exciting to see more money going into training for pastoral leadership. And calling people into ministry. So those are the biggest increases in the budget area. Questions on anything you saw or wondered about out of the budget, or are wondering? And no question is out of line. And then we'll get to Phil's broader question about the future.
Russ, if you could just review for me the purpose of the 2022 budget expense maximum. Is that just to allow the board basically to do the work for the next year during this year, knowing what their parameters are?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we implemented that about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, Linda. And part of it is our working to project out and agree with the conference. Part of the work that the district board did over about 1.5 years back in 2015 into 2016, I think I've got my years right on that, was some good work at we operated a deficit. We have long operated at a deficit in this district. I think the year before I became district executive, our deficit, our real income versus real expenses deficit was about $700,000. That has come down to where we're in about the $300,000 range now. And the determination we made a couple of years ago was that we felt at a $300,000 range deficit with what our assets have earned in general over time since we've had them, that we saw that as sustainable for hopefully 15 to 20 years into the future, kind of thing. And so putting that maximum in is kind of a discipline that the district has said yes, and the board then knows that's our target number we're planning at if things are holding. It's feasible. One year we came back and we said we tried to cut things, but we just couldn't, and we came a little higher and asked for the budget to be a little bigger that year. This year, we're coming in under what we had a 475 maximum, and we're bringing in a budget at 466. So yeah, it's a planning tool.
Thank you.
The other piece that is not in the operating budget, just to be clear, is we also have money that we have been setting aside for church planting work. And so that comes separately. And so on those pages at the top of 57, in addition to that operating budget of $466,729 in expenses, we are proposing that we'll spend $84,180 in church planting support next year. When the Lindsay Church sold, the funds from the sale of the Lindsay Church, which was about $125,000, were set aside to support church planting work. In the allocation last year on the funds from the sale of the parking lot in Koreatown, $225,000 of that money was set aside for church planting work. So that 80,000 will use up the next year. We anticipate it will use up the rest of the Lindsay money and begin to move into using some of the money out of the Ministry and Improvement Fund allocation that we have for church planting. And so the motion will be to approve the operating budget and the church planting budget today. Okay. Well, the question was asked by Phil, and I'll let Nelda answer this one.
Oh, thank you.
I think the question is, where do we see ourselves in the, where do I see us? Where do we see ourselves in 5 to 15 years in the PSWD, in churches, memberships, finances, a host of those kinds of things. And Phil mentioned that unpleasant possibility of needing to sell additional church buildings. And they all do tie together. I think one of the things I'll say about the church selling buildings or properties, we've actually sold 3 buildings over the last 3-4 years. One of those was the Lindsay building, and you know what we're doing with those funds. The property we had in Koreatown, we sold, and that became the Ministry and Improvement Fund, which is now set up, and churches can get facility repair and improvement grants from that up to $20,000 allocated to each church. There's money for pastoral coaching in that. There's money to encourage folks to attend the annual conference and the training opportunities there. There's money for new ministries that church wants to invest in, not maybe so much short kinds of things, but more long-term kinds of ideas they want to try to reach their communities. And there's money for youth ministry work, either to get youth to events that are to Brethren events, or to get youth into to help work at developing a youth program. And we defined youth as like age 10 to age 27. So it's very broad. The conference asked for that last year. So those funds are available. So and then the other property that sold was the Tucson property. And that congregation asked us to hold those funds to see if there might be the possibility of a church plant in Tucson for at least 5 years. And so, we continue to be open and pray about, is there a possibility to do something in Tucson again? And that money is invested at the Brethren Foundation and being held to do that kind of work. And then we had a church closed because a fire destroyed it and their community in Paradise. And the insurance settlement funds from that we have set aside to help growing churches with capital investments. We're in conversation right now with Circle of Peace as they're beginning work towards needing to build a sanctuary space, and there we will be able to make a contribution, an asset contribution, to be a part of that from those funds. Part of the remodeling funds beyond the cost of buying the building that will take place for Los Banos will come from we call that the Growth from the Ashes Fund, and that kind of work. So the short answer in some ways to the question of if we sell properties, right now our hope has been that the core that we have in finances as a district will be enough that we should be able to work to operate for the foreseeable future off of those, and that we might be able to use monies from sales to invest in the future of new churches and existing churches that are here in our district, rather than putting it into the bank and supporting the center. It's always possible we may need additional funds, but our hope would be to do that. Nelda, you want to add, or anyone else want to add anything or ask any other questions about that side of it before we start to talk about what might things look like as we move into the future.
No, I think that's, that this district is indeed blessed to be able to have funds that allow us to get income each year to help our budget, that many districts our size are much more limited in what they can do and the kind of staffing they can have. And we have been very blessed to be able to do what we have. And we've seen growth through that. And I think that's important to recognize as well, that as we've closed churches, we've also had churches start up. And so that there's some balance in that. Now, new churches often.
Nelda, can I interrupt you for a quick second? Richard, Martha Barrios has joined us. Buenos dias, Martha. Richard, do you want to explain what she'll need to do? And I'm going to set up translation so you can do that for us if you would.
Ok, ok. Marta, un placer. Soy Richard, el pastor Richard, y yo voy a traducir lo que están hablando. Entonces, lo que hay que hacer es, al conectarse, ponerse en español, y con mucho gusto yo voy a poder ayudarte. ¿Está bien, Marta?
Gracias a Dios.
Oh, that wouldn't be good.
Marta, ¿estás allí?
I almost made Martha the translator instead of you.
Okay.
Sí, aquí estoy.
Ok, Marta, un momentito, entonces déjame ver cómo vamos a hacer para que me escuches tú. Ok, aquí tengo yo Spanish.
Okay.
Vamos a ponerme aquí.
Richard, give me a thumbs up if it looks good. Gracias. Go ahead, Nelda.
Well, that's a good question. Where was I?
You had finished kind of talking about we've had some growth though in other places. So
Yeah, that we've had both. We've had some closings, but we've had some growth as well, and I think that's because of the way we've been able to staff the district and to support church congregations within the district to make it possible for that to happen, so that we don't see, I mean, any major need for major changes in the next 5 to 10 years as the way we sit right now.
yeah, I mean, the question is always an interesting one. So in the time frame that I've been the district executive, we have taken action. The first church we closed was Central Evangelical, which was one of our Korean congregations, and that had long since departed in relationship. And some of you will recall the history of a lawsuit with them for several years. That had come to the place where it had moved far enough that we didn't need to maintain them as a member, and so we closed them. But we have since closed 4 additional churches. I think that is correct. And we have started 4 new church plants have started within that same time frame. And in my mind, that's a hopeful thing, that if we can at least keep even, if not eventually perhaps move to the positive side, the work would, we would continue and work to grow. My suspicion as I look to the future and as I see our congregations here is that I suspect that we will continue to have 25 to 20, range someplace between probably 23 and 28 churches for the next 5 to 10 years. What will continue to change in that is that we will likely have a few more Anglo, Caucasian, whatever language you want, English-speaking congregations that may well close, while we have more Spanish language congregations begin to grow. That said, I'm not opposed to us doing church planting of English-speaking congregations either. And in fact, I'm in a conversation with a person who has an idea for an English language congregation they're praying about whether God is calling them to do that and whether they might partner with the congregation that they're a part of. But, you know, I mean, there are those kinds of exciting conversations that are taking place in a variety of places that could lead to that. So it would not surprise me to see us be a district that right now, 7 of our 25 churches are worshiping in Spanish. That we would become a district that might be closer to 16 and 16 or 15 and 15, something like that, 10 to 15 years from now. Now, I also say that knowing there are some churches that I've talked to pastors of where I know that those churches had been told 40 years ago they weren't going to make it till the end of the decade they were in then. And they're still worshiping, and you know they haven't grown large, they haven't disappeared in smallness, but they hold their own, and they are vital faith communities, and we want to do everything we can to work and support them. So I don't bet against any of our I don't bet, period, but my prayers are that we will see renewal and growth in those places and new opportunities in those. So how exciting would it be to keep all that we have and add another 8 churches to the mix that may be worshiping in Spanish or worshiping in English and Spanish. Richard, who's doing translation now, his congregation worships in Spanish, but they began before the pandemic. They were beginning to experiment with a once-a-month English-only service for their younger people who worship well in Spanish and who provide music leadership in Spanish, but maybe can't invite some of their friends that they might like to invite who don't speak Spanish. So, Al, you wanted to jump in with something.
Well, actually, you partially answered my question, which is the development of Spanish churches and the movement in the district in that direction. I'm just wondering that since that is an obvious shift, and it certainly reflects the demographic change in California and Nevada and Arizona, I'm just wondering whether we perhaps should have some kind of study group or whatever to make preparations to as we develop this. I mean, I know as head of the committee looking for people to fill places in the PSWD that it was difficult to find Spanish language people to fill that for a variety of reasons, including their workloads. But it would seem to me that maybe a study group in the next couple of years for the obvious change that's taking place might be something worth considering.
Thank you. Elizabeth. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I'd just like to suggest that we have a resource in the Fuller Seminary. They have a full Spanish program for all the degrees. And so there's a lot of resources there that already exist that we might be able to tap into in helping us do what Al is talking about. In other words, meeting people who are coming from all over South America to study here.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting opportunity, and there is incredible energy and passion in those congregations. But I would say this: we have Caucasian white congregations that are struggling, and we have congregations that are growing rapidly and doing really well, and we have some that are holding the same. So and we have the same across the 7 Spanish language congregations, that same kind of mix of some that are doing really well, some where the ministry work is really hard and the numbers are small. And so that is a challenging piece. I will say that many of our Spanish congregations do work with a high, low income population, hardworking, salt of the earth, great people, but they are working in jobs that are not the kinds of things that produce incomes like we have in some of our other congregations. Most of our pastors in those churches receive maybe some housing support money. Most of them are multi-vocational. And so that is a challenging part of that work. One of the questions that came up in the chat talked about our finances and where are they invested, wondered about that. So we have about $6 million, $5 million, $5.5 million that is not committed to other projects like Growth from the Ashes or Ministry and Improvement, or some things like that, that we have. About half of those funds are invested through the Brethren Foundation, and in a diversified portfolio that is pushing a little bit towards trying to get more return to support what we're doing. The investment managers there have worked fairly well to get through downturns, and over the past, even in 2008, part of why we ended up sticking with the Brethren is I think in 2008 we were across 3 different investment houses, and the Brethren House was the one that performed best on behalf of the district in doing that kind of thing. But about half of the money is there. The other money is invested in loans to congregations. The South Bay Journey congregation undertook a $700,000 remodeling. Actually, it was a $1.2 million remodeling, if my memory is right, Herb. They had about $500,000, and we, as a district, loaned them the balance on that. And they're making payments. They're paying well ahead on their return there. We also have mortgage loans to Circle of Peace, to Papago Buttes, to the Laverne congregation, and to the Glendale congregation. Those return at a 5% interest rate. And then we've also put some money into certificates of deposit. It was, for a while, those were getting 2%. That's not happening anymore. But we've tried to keep ourselves in a fairly diversified position with the resources. Any other questions or things you'd like to hear about from the district or any other district board members?
This is Linda Davis talking. I want to commend the board for the long-term thinking about finances that are reflected in those pages that we've talked about. I know there was a time where I felt like we weren't really doing that, and it was confusing as a member of a church to see where are we headed and how is this all going to work. And I imagine that's been some hard work for the board to do some long-term planning, and nothing is certain, but I believe in having the best plan we can and then going from that. And it looks like the board has worked at doing that, and I appreciate that.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Elizabeth.
I would like to add to the future thinking in that it will be interesting to see what we experience and learn from what we are going through at this time. It could be we would want to actually invest in Zoom studios and streaming studios and other equipment that would include, in the long run, ability to reach out to the community in more ways than just a church building, but having many other ways in which we could. I've been fascinated to see who has showed up at my Zoom services from across the country. So it could be this is something we would incorporate, not go back to the old norm, but have a new norm of both real church services, that is where we attend, as well as Zoom services on a permanent basis.
I would agree with that, in that when our congregation was meeting virtually, at times we did have extra people come in. And when we went back to in-person meetings, we closed the door to those persons that did not wish to expose themselves to the virus. So a mixture of in-person plus streaming to other people that were shut in or distant areas would be a benefit to our churches.
Let me go to Herb and then I'll go to Jeff.
Thanks, Russ. Yeah, I also wanted to echo the sentiment that it's really encouraging to hear that the district is doing well on finances. So my thanks to the board for that. And then I just had a question about the district's relationship with the Church of the Brethren leadership out of Elgin. And could you talk a little bit about how does the district relate to those folks? And are there any initiatives or things that that's coming out of Elgin that might impact some of the things that the district is working on over the future?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for I mean, I think we are fortunate that we have resources and reserves. And I share this to say, as an awareness piece, I am the only full-time district executive in the Church of the Brethren west of the state of Ohio. All of those other districts, some of whom have more congregations, a couple of districts that have as much geography as we have less than full-time people serving them. Partly because when a church closes in their world, it doesn't sell for what churches generally sell for in our district. And we have been fortunate that way. So we are, the connection to the national denomination is that, and we have Shannon McNeil on this call with us. She's waving. Shannon is an interpretation person on the staff and planned giving staff for, I'm botching your introduction there, Shannon. Sorry about that. You want to quickly just say who you are and then I'll answer the rest of Herb's question?
Yeah, no problem. So my name's Shannon. I am one of the mission advancement advocates for our mission advancement staff, which is kind of a fancy way of saying donor relations fundraising, but in many ways, as Russ was saying, interpretation as well. So we're going through and interpreting the missions ministries of the Church of the Brethren denomination as a whole. So when we meet with individuals or congregations, we'll talk about everything from discipleship ministry programs, Office of Ministry, to Brethren Disaster Ministries, and all of our service and international mission oriented projects. So I hope that was a good enough description. So,
thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
yeah.
I mean, I think part of what I would say is that there are various departments that we connect to. We have an active group in the district that participates in disaster ministries. And we often send a group of a dozen people from our district to go do 2 weeks of service someplace where the brethren are responding to a flood or a hurricane or that kind of stuff. And that's a piece we participate in with churches across the country through the denominational offices. We work very closely with the discipleship ministry staff in Elgin. That is where church planting work is headquartered. And last year, the staff, one of the discipleship ministry staffs was at district conference, helped lead a workshop on church planting, but we spend a good amount of time working with folks in that area. And connecting into the resourcing and church planting. I think discipleship ministries is also we've also been in contact with the change in directors in the intercultural ministries area out of discipleship ministries, as we are one of several districts that are much more, at least at a district level, culturally mixed than some other districts are. And certainly we connect in through the annual conference. And while this is happening, there's another session from being done by the moderator-elect talking about the denominational compelling vision piece that didn't get voted on this summer, that talks about helping churches focus on seeing and being a part of what Jesus is doing in their neighborhood, and really encouraging orientation of ministry that way of what are you doing and how are you connecting locally. And I think that echoes what we're trying to do here in this district, which is rather than one program fits all, how do we work to encourage the ministry that Pasadena feels called into doing, the ministry that Bakersfield is called into, which is different. Bakersfield and McFarland are, 25 miles apart, but they're entirely different places as far as the field of ministry is. And so how do we support folks doing things there? So I don't know if that answered your question or not, Herb, but Mary
Yes,
Kay,
thank you.
to that? And then we'll go to Jeff.
I'm sorry, Russ, were you asking?
I was going to see, I thought Mary Kay maybe wanted to add something to that, and then I'll go to Jeff.
Yes, I would. Thank you. We have been invited by annual conference to do an insight session at annual conference on our unity statement or our unity agreement. And of course, we know what's happened with annual conference. I was re-invited to bring this panel to annual conference in 2021. We'll see what happens with that. And along with all your ideas, we welcome through the evaluation process comments on what you felt worked well and what you would change in terms of the way we have done our district conference this year.
Thanks. Jeff, you had a question or a comment you wanted to make?
I just wanted to tag on to what Elizabeth and Norma shared. This time, I feel like, is a tremendous opportunity for congregations to reach out beyond their neighborhood, beyond their community, beyond their city. I participate virtually with a congregation in Bogota, Colombia, with a Community of Joy in Salisbury, Maryland, with a church in Nebraska, and I occasionally preach through Zoom with a church in Hawaii. The church in Hawaii has doubled its worship attendance through Zoom worship services as opposed to what they would have if they were worshiping in-house on island. So I would like to challenge all pastors and congregations to think about who can we connect with beyond our city and community that we can have a ministry to and be a blessing to.
I thank you, Jeff. I think it's a challenging time, and I'll say this again this afternoon, and you read it in my report. It's been a challenging year for pastors, and trying to figure out new ways of connecting and doing things and all of that. And yeah, now we're coming back. Some are coming, although I think we're going to be back not being into our buildings for a while again. How do we continue to work at what does that mean? How do we support that? One of the pieces that, as in the money that we set aside for in the Ministry and Improvement Fund is for leadership development, and the big chunk of that money is going to be used to work to produce some events. Or if there's events happening, send people to those events virtually, in person, however that works. But working ideally not just to give pastors information, but to get teams of leadership in churches working together and training together, so that it's not just the pastor who knows how to do something or is learning something and trying to get it, but a team in the church committing to working at something. And the hope being that we might have 4 or 5 churches in our district that will each be unique in what they're doing in that, but but working on the same issue, perhaps children's ministry, or how do we use the internet to reach out in new ways? And so I could easily see working to put together something in the early time frame of this next year, where we would connect and do some virtual work with teams from congregations, with some follow-up coaching over the course of the next year to check back in, to help them make that kind of transition of how do we do online and in person? How do we continue to develop a vital community in both places? So the opportunities are there. I mean, Jeff, it in some ways, it goes back to the work you were doing as a congregational life team member almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, in that time frame, but trying to provide that broader training and work for folks. So Nelda, did you have any last words you wanted to get in?
No, I appreciate everyone who joined us this morning, and glad to answer your questions, and don't hesitate to be in contact with us if you have other questions that come up or information you want to share, goal ideas that you would like for the board to work on. We're open to suggestions to that as well. Not that we don't have anything to do, but we're also open to looking to the future.
Well, thank you all. We are going to bring this to a close, and we will see hopefully many of you shortly. And hopefully you've gotten a link now that should work. You'll need to rename yourself with that link when you come into the meeting, but hopefully you now have a link that will get you into this morning's business session, which is a webinar format. So
Russ, this is Linda Davis, and I did get the link over the last hour. So thank you.
very good. Hopefully others did as well. So
I did too.
Good. Well, thank you all. Blessings, and we'll see you soon. You want to log in a little before 9:30 because we'd like to start promptly at 9:30.
Thank you.